Hello, and welcome to the CU Try Show. I am Karen Sims with the Trauma and Resiliency Initiative. And I don't know if many of you are aware or know, but this month is Child Abuse Awareness Month. I know that there are lots of other awareness months, but it's classically known as Child Abuse Awareness Month, and it's also Sexual Abuse Prevention Month. And I am so privileged today to have two people from Prevent Child Abuse Illinois, and who will tell you more about the organization and their work. And hopefully it all makes sense, because the work of Prevent Child Abuse Illinois is completely aligned with addressing trauma, preventing adverse childhood experiences, and also promoting resilient communities and families. Without further ado, I want to do my last disclaimer. The views and the opinions of our guests are their own. I do not anticipate anything controversial, but I always want you to know that. And we're able to do this work thanks to the generous donations and funding from the Mental Health Board, the City of Champaign, and it's always a pleasure to be able to do this work. So welcome. Denise, can you please introduce yourself, and then I'll defer to Kelsey. And I'm going to put my glasses back on as I sort of go to Facebook Live.
Awesome. Thank you, Karen. Good afternoon. My name is Denise McCaffrey, and I am the Executive Director for Prevent Child Abuse Illinois.
Welcome. And Kelsey?
Hi, I'm Kelsey Green. I am the director of the ACEs project for Prevent Child Abuse Illinois. Hi, I'm Kelsey Green. I am the director of the ACEs project for Prevent Child Abuse Illinois. Hi, I'm Kelsey Green.
Thank you. So, can you say a little bit more about yourselves, the work that you do, just so that you better conceptualize? So Denise is the executive director. Kelsey mentioned that she's the ACEs project coordinator. Can you say a little bit more about the work that you do so that people can kind of know, who are you?
Sure. I'll go first, if that's all right.
Yes, please.
Again, Denise McCaffrey, and I am currently the Executive Director at Prevent Child Abuse Illinois. I've been the Executive Director for almost 5 years, but I've been with our agency for over 21 years. I started out as a prevention resource developer 21 plus years ago, and that was an exciting project. They brought us in to work with substance abuse treatment providers and domestic violence service providers and child welfare providers, because those things all intermix and really affect families and contribute to or are part of child abuse. So that was an exciting project. I worked in that project for over 8 years. And then I became our director of programs. And I'll talk a little bit more after Kelsey introduces herself about what we actually do and what some of our programs are. But I have been with the agency, like I said, over 21 years, and working with families and children and working in child abuse prevention is really my passion.
Wow. And I have so many questions. So it sounds like you've actually seen probably a lot of transformations and changes over time in policy and practice, and maybe even just people and how people approach the work.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Before coming to Prevent Child Abuse Illinois, I worked as a caseworker for quite a few years. How I got started into this really goes all the way back to when I was a young single mom, long time ago, but parenting was so hard. I had 2 small children, single mom, and I wasn't the best parent that I could be. I love my children dearly, and I really wanted to be a good parent, but I yelled at them a lot, and I lost my patience, and I didn't know how to be a good parent. And I started taking parenting classes, and I took every single parenting class I could find. I eventually found a parent support group that met every single week, and I started going to that. And I was probably around 30 some years old. The director of the program where I was going to the parent support groups came to me and said, Denise, how would you like to start teaching our parenting classes? And I said, I can't do that. Oh my gosh, no, I just barely graduated high school. I don't have a college degree. I can't do any of that. And she said, Denise, you have taken the parenting classes more times than anyone here has even taught them. you know this stuff, and I'll have someone teach them with you until you're ready. And if you wanted to go to college, social work, yeah, that would be right up your alley. And it just, it affected me deeply because she believed in me more than I believed in myself in those days. And she saw me as a good parent. And that really changed my life. And it launched me into a career of teaching parenting classes and going to college and getting my social work degree and really starting working, firsthand with families and children. And I walk the walk because I've been there. I know what it's like to parent. I know what it's like to be a single parent. And that's how this became my passion.
Wow. So I think you said a number of powerful things. So I clearly believe, and I really want to normalize this, that most of us aren't parenting experts because our kids don't come with like books and operational manuals, and depending on how we were raised and what changes and how knowledge changes and what information changes, many of us, benefit from reading, talking to other people, hearing and learning and listening. There's a local organization called Real Life Families, and they do parenting mentor. Because again, I think we've so not normalized that village where we used to kind of create information, where we got information, and now people are trying to figure it out by themselves. And so parents out there know that it's a journey. And what I also loved that I hope other providers and other organizations hear is, that when we build capacity where people can see themselves as a part of the change, they can catch fire, and it is transformative. Because it's one thing for somebody to tell you about it. It's another thing when you have real lived experience and you're like, I'm not telling you something I kind of heard about. I'm telling you something that I know, which is so inspirational. And I can imagine, so I want to hear more about the culture and climate, but I can imagine it really creates an environment where everybody feels seen, heard, and cared for. So that's beautiful. All right. How do you follow that,
100%.
Kelsey?
Yeah.
Right. So again, I'm Kelsey Green, and I am the director of the ACEs project. And it's a new project with Prevent Child Abuse Illinois. We just officially started in December. And a lot of our program goals are centered around just spreading awareness of what ACEs are, as well as creating a network of people across Illinois who are focusing on ACEs so that we can really collaborate and join efforts around adverse childhood experiences across the state. So those are two of our main objectives. And I kind of got to this point. I started with my bachelor's in social work and graduated in 2017 from the University of Illinois in Champaign, and went on to work in child welfare as a case manager for around 2 years, and then spent the rest of my time working as it's like a case manager too, for early childhood education. And in my time in child welfare, that's when I learned about what ACEs were. We never talked about it in school. And just like going through it and taking that 10-question questionnaire myself is what made me realize that ACEs, it went from being a problem that just my clients face to being a problem that I've gone through as well, and likely most people have. So it really opened my eyes to the fact that our clients really aren't that different from ourselves, and being able to make that recognition, I think, really helps forward us in helping them along their progress as well and their life journey. So that's kind of how I got here.
No, I love it. However, I warn you, I do this content rich. And so, but I want to make sure everybody's walking alongside, because there could be people who just stumble upon it. Explain we're talking about child abuse, and then you mentioned there's this ACEs prevention thing. How will people connect them? Right? Can you break it down and help people understand what's the connection between adverse childhood experiences? I think that's what you said, this ACEs thing, and child abuse. Can you bridge the divide?
Yeah, definitely. So ACEs are really To put it very simply, just any kind of trauma that you go through between birth and the age of 18. So in the original study, it focused on 10 main things, which included childhood abuse and neglect. And that included like emotional neglect, environmental neglect, sexual abuse, physical abuse, those kinds of things, as well as household dysfunction. So really ACEs are child abuse. They're kind of the same thing, only ACEs is that science behind how child abuse then affects you in the long term, beyond 18, in terms of health and other situations as well.
Yeah. And so the other thing that I'm imagining that sort of is always interesting, I remember learning about ACEs, is that sometimes when people think about child abuse, they're only thinking about those direct events that happen to you, right? So people get things like if there was a spanking that was too aggressive, they get that, or sexual abuse. But what is interesting about ACEs, and I'm not sure, is things like growing up in a household with a parent who has a mental health need, or having a parent out of the household. Sometimes not having access to what you need can be as impactful as the things that directly happen to you. Because again, I think it's so tempting to normalize, or right, we only look for like, okay, abuse is this thing that is this big, act upon you, and not sometimes, I always think about like neglect isn't always like a DCFS definition, like people don't take care of you. It could be you just don't get what you need because maybe your primary caregiver worked 3 jobs or just was depressed and couldn't be emotionally available. So, but yeah, and so you get a chance to do work to help people know more about these ACEs. Of course, I have 1,000 questions because people, I'm sure, want to know, like, how do I learn more about that? And why is the state making that a priority, or all of those big questions? So Denise, do you have anything else that you want to offer?
I think that's one of those big trends that you were talking about earlier. You asked what changes over the years that I've seen.
Yeah.
And, when we talk about child abuse prevention, child abuse and neglect has been with us since the beginning of time. If you go all the way back, children have been bought and sold and abandoned, and, bad things have happened. And if you ask an expert about the history of child abuse, they usually break it into like 3 different eras.
Oh, really?
And the first era is like before, I think they throw out the date of 1847, 1874. I have dyslexia. Sometimes I mix up my numbers. Because there really were no formal systems to look at and protect children. And then in 1874 or 40, I think it was 74, there was a case called the case of Mary Ellen. And Mary Ellen was a little girl in the slums of New York. And you can look her up, Mary Ellen Willis, I think is her name, on the internet. And the short story here is that a caseworker did get involved at a Wheeler to help save Mary Ellen. She was, her father died. Her mother had to put her up to an orphanage, and a woman came and claimed to be related to her that wasn't, and that woman abused her terribly. So the caseworker did get involved, and in order to prosecute the case, they had to go to the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, and it was illegal to beat your horse, but not your child in those days. So that was like the very first case that was tried under animal rights laws that sent reverberations around the country, and really absolutely started the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. And then lots of agencies grew up. So then we have a second era from like that 1874 era to about, I think it was 1962. And in 1962, there was a book written called The Battered Child Syndrome. And in that book, doctors got involved and they started talking about what is child abuse. And the federal government and state governments actually started listening. And that's when we started getting laws around, child abuse and neglect. And when our own, Department of Children and Family Services got involved, and it really changed the whole landscape of how we dealt with child abuse. Well, I think there's another era now that happened in 1998 when they did the ACEs study. And we learned when a child has adverse childhood experiences, and not all ACEs are child abuse. An ACE can happen if you have a death in the family of a parent or someone close to that child, and no one steps in to fill that gap. ACEs can happen by historical racism. ACEs can happen in other things, that trauma that happens in children's lives. And we know now it affects brain development. And that can really affect a person as they grow into adulthood. Those changes in brain development can last into adulthood. And I really think we're in a new era when we realize that if adverse childhood experiences are causing problems within our children's brains, and we recognize those, we can help to prevent them. We can start putting things in place. We can help our children learn how to be resilient. And if we figure out that we had ACEs as a child, and they're still affecting us as an adult, our health, our mental health, addictions, all different types of things are impacted by ACEs, then we can start to help ourselves be resilient and help change how we move forward in life. So I think ACEs have been a huge impact. And I think that's why it's important for the different organizations around the state that are getting involved. The Department of Children and Family Services, Department of Public Health, Department of Human Services. So they all have programs now that are looking at and talking about ACEs.
All
and
right.
how we overcome those traumas and how we build resilience.
So I want to say, and I of course, I want to ask a couple more questions because, the name of your organization is, Prevent Child Abuse. And so it sounds like as a part of the evolution, there used to be a lot of just education about child abuse as a prevention strategy. But it seems like, and I'm curious for both of you, if maybe the Prevent Child Abuse has taken on a broader frame beyond just sort of education about signs and symptoms and what to look for. It seems like you're talking about something broader than that. Am I right? Can you clue me in? Because again, if you hear the title, you think, okay, so I know what to look for and what not to look for, but what you're talking about is much deeper than that.
Well, absolutely. Kelsey, I'll give you a chance to talk to here in a minute. But gosh, I could talk about this all day because
Clearly a passion.
It is a passion. But it is important to know the signs and symptoms. It's very important. It's important to recognize that the abuse is out there. If we would talk about child sexual abuse, which no one ever does want to talk about it is the most underreported form of abuse that's out there. 1 in 8 children will be sexually abused before their 18th birthday.
Wow.
That's staggering. If we don't know about it, if we don't know how to recognize the signs and symptoms, we can't prevent it. And the other piece is, if we don't talk about it, we can't prevent it. We have to be able to talk about the problem. And, we did early on spend a lot of time talking about, signs and symptoms and how to prevent. And now we really are trying to move into the conversation that we all have a role to play in preventing child abuse and neglect. And every child deserves a great childhood. Yeah. You can be the best parent or caregiver on the planet. That doesn't mean your child will not be abused at some point. Almost all children go out and they have teachers, they have coaches, they sleep over at friends' houses. That puts them in danger where they could be abused by someone else. Yeah. So all children deserve great childhoods. We have to be able to talk about it. We have to know those signs and symptoms, but we have to recognize that we all have a role to play. And I think that moves us into a new conversation of helping every parent be the best parent, and really focus on the positives. Kelsey, wonderful. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say, to reiterate what you were saying, the education is a very important first step. But like Denise was mentioning, I think now that we have education widely available and out there. It's important to start moving into social systems as well, and economic systems, like all those broader systems that affect our daily lives too, and really create trauma-informed systems within those,
Yeah.
so that we can, all be aware of what's going on and really work together, like Denise was saying, to create a better childhood for everybody.
I love it. So I want to just sort of pull this thread just so that people can get a sense of the depth and breadth, because one of the other things that I'm aware of when I think about child abuse prevention in this larger conversation is, if I am rural, urban, in diverse communities, sometimes people had once experienced some of those issues as sort of being not culturally responsive, right? So if I'm in a more rural environment, might have one set of parenting practices. If I'm in a different environment, and it felt like for some people, right, because I do work both with rural and urban communities, that both groups of people felt some stigmatization around when we first started talking about child abuse prevention, right? Like it was like, well, you're trying to sort of make our kids or you critique our parenting. And one of the things that I've noticed, and I think we should just talk about it, is there's been even some evolution around in the work of child abuse prevention that really makes it culturally responsive and adaptive. And it isn't based on some, I don't know, classical ways of being. It really is based on what do we know that works for children's brains and bodies and builds healthy connections and positive relationships. And it's not so subjective, but really evidence-based. Has that been your awareness, or am I just an outsider not getting it right? But it feels like the conversation is much deeper now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yes, there's so much research that I'm seeing now coming out, especially on ACEs, that is focused on the cultural aspect as well. Because like you said, we have these long-standing histories of how we've parented. And there are aspects of that that are very valid and that need to be respected. And so I think there is more research coming out that is not only protecting children, but also respecting those cultural differences.
Yeah.
100%,
So again, yeah. Okay, Denise, am I right? It has been an evolution, even in the work that you've done and other organizations. It just seems like it is so relatable, again, based on science, based on evidence, based on research about what builds strong connections, what's good for you as a parent, how do you take care of yourself and not get to overwhelm, what helps you not go to 10 or 15, how do you think about yourself being as a part of a supportive network or community, right? So those aren't cultural. It really is. We know that there's some things that help support you in good parenting, and there are other things that make you more vulnerable. And then that's when that slippery slope kind of comes in, where you might do something out of anger or impulsivity or not good care that ends up abusive. And so am I right? The work seems far more supportive of good parenting, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we do know a lot more now about bonding and building those relationships that are so important to the parent and to the child. And we know that if those don't happen, those become those adverse childhood experiences, right? And I totally agree with what you're saying. And I think it is beyond what, parents, I think most parents love their children.
Yeah.
They absolutely do. And they want to be good parents.
Yeah.
Sometimes things get in the way. Sometimes mental health issues or substance abuse issues get in the way of good parenting. And we talk a lot about neglect. Neglect, is one of those things. It's not about necessarily being poor. Most people don't understand neglect. If you simply don't have resources, that's not necessarily neglect. Neglect is not providing for a child's basic needs, whether it's physical or emotional. If it's due to poverty, there's programs out there to help, and they don't make the judgments on, why you're in that situation. So I think we've learned a lot. We've come a long way. And the whole goal is to support positive parenting based on now what we know about child development.
So I'm good. That's a perfect segue. So let's do some commercial stuff because I want to talk about, again, individual recommendations for parents and communities and stakeholders. But the commercial part is, it is Child Abuse Prevention Month. How will people know about it? Because part of what you just described is right, that there's a lot of education and information and work that you're doing. How would people know that? I'm imagining, having been around the city, I've seen some signs, but share with people what they should be looking for and the kinds of things that you've done this month.
Pinwheels, if I can do that. So one of the signs are blue ribbons. Another one of the signs are pinwheels. And, we do a lot around the color blue because blue is Child Abuse Prevention Month color. And so look for blue ribbons, look for pinwheels, look for signs that talk about, why are my cookies at the bakery this month blue? Because why do we here in Springfield, we've got a lot of buildings that are lit up blue. And I think in Champaign, there's a few of those as well. We have utility companies that have given out blue light bulbs to different organizations. And again, it's all to raise awareness. So if you see an organization that has that blue pinwheels or ribbons or lights, probably an organization that is working with families and kids, or an organization that is involved. We've had a lot of retail stores and businesses that are willing to put up the signs and the pinwheels and have flyers to explain to customers why they're trying to raise awareness around child abuse prevention.
Wow. Okay. So look for the blue ribbons, pinwheels. Kelsey, do you have other things to add?
No, that's a lot of what we're doing. I know Pandemonium in Savoy is doing some blue donuts too. So if you're local to the area, that's what's going on there. But yeah, I think Denise mentioned everything. We do have a screening of Resilience, which is a movie that goes more into the science of ACEs. And that will be, I believe it's Denise, is it the 24th of April? Okay. So it's the 24th of April. At 4 p.m. and that will be on all of the PBS stations.
Oh, wow. Really? Okay. Well, I'm gonna make sure we plug that because I'm sure I'll forget. So do you know what time?
4 o'clock.
Okay. All right. We'll make sure we plug that. Resilience is a phenomenal documentary. So for people who are local, if you kind of want to know a lot of the best practices, the science of what helps heal, which is aligned with like all of the prevent childhood research, you should definitely check it out. And watch it with friends and family. All right. So now that we've done the commercial, the other thing, I'm going to do one more plug because I think it's just a wonderful thing. If you go to Prevent, and we'll make sure that there's information available, but if you go to their website, the Prevent Child Abuse Illinois website, they have a really great resource packet. So we'll also make sure that there's an available link to that. So it has like information about things to look for, signs and symptoms, all of those things, information about the Pinwheel Project, and also just a great way to follow their work. So there's no need to sort of make up things, or they're just a phenomenal resource to anybody who wants to make life better for children and families. To that end, right? So did I get that plug in?
Yeah, thank you. Awesome.
So in addition to the good work, can we talk about some specifics? Because you do a lot in the region and the state. Can you talk about how would people know what work you've done, right? Because sometimes people know it by like projects or activities, but really can't connect it back to your organization. Help people understand some of the projects you do or that are birthed through Prevent Child Abuse.
Sure. First of all, we are a chapter of Prevent Child Abuse America.
Yeah.
So there is a chapter in almost every state and Washington, D.C. So we're part of a larger umbrella organization. We have sister chapters all over the U.S. So you might see Prevent Child Abuse Missouri or Indiana or other places as well that do similar work like we do. One of our big things that we do every year, we hold an annual conference on child abuse prevention. The last 2 years, it has been virtual, which was brand new for us. We had to learn how to do that, just like everyone else was scrambling to learn how to do Zoom. Normally, we would hold that in person. We rotate it between usually Springfield and the Chicago area every other year, just to kind of move it around the state. We bring in nationally known speakers to that conference every year, and it's a usually 2-day conference. We try to really touch on kind of best practice, cutting edge information, new trends in child abuse prevention. We have been holding monthly webinars with lots of different topics, from the effects of domestic violence on children to lots on childhood ACEs and childhood trauma. We've been talking about human trafficking. We've been talking about a lot of different things. We have some positive ones we do too, about, happiest baby on the block, and getting out the word about, how to calm a crying baby, and just parenting information for parents as well. So you might have attended one of our webinars. Like I said, we've been doing at least one a month, sometimes 2 and 3 a month in the past couple of years. We have a literature distribution program. So you might be sitting in the doctor's office and see a brochure about oh gosh, never shaking a baby, or possibly even how well do you know your lover? Who's watching the kids? Very important, who you're leaving your kids with. So we do that, and you might see some of our literature around. What am I forgetting on the spot, Kelsey?
I don't know. I think you covered a lot of it.
Our primary work is around education and public awareness. We do have several public awareness campaigns. Again, we do a lot of those in partnership with other organizations. Every May is Water Wise Month, because a childhood drowning, people don't even think about that, but as the pools start to open and people get their ponds in the backyards ready and things like that, not child abuse, but still can endanger a child. And we know oftentimes a child drowning has to do with someone that's not paying close attention to the kids. So, we do campaigns, public awareness campaigns, get Water Wise supervised. We have our Shaken Baby Syndrome, Never Shake a Baby campaign, because shaking a baby can be deadly. Now we're working on a new ACEs public awareness campaign to get the word out. I did a short little training recently for a group of people, and I asked if they had ever heard of ACEs, and most of them had not. And we talk about it every day, so it's amazing how many people still don't know what those stand for and don't know what they are. So we're working really hard to get the word out, so that anyone hears ACEs, they'll think, oh, I know what that is. Adverse childhood experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I'm going to go back to you, Kelsey. Did she cover it all?
Yeah, I think so. With the ACEs project, a lot of what we're doing right now is centered around partnering with other groups across the state. So I have a meeting coming up to help an individual in DeKalb kind of create an ACEs awareness group there. So it's a lot of stuff like that, a lot of trainings, a lot of education. So I think she covered all of it.
All right. So my next question, or curiosity is, education is super important. And, imagine that someone doesn't sort of pick up a flyer or see a campaign. Are there messages that you sort of think are super important? I know, Denise, you've mentioned a couple times, sort of being observant. You've talked about shaken baby syndrome. It sounds like that those campaigns are addressing specific needs that you kind of have seen. So if you are thinking about messaging that are directly aimed at sort of caregivers, are there like what kind of messaging, and then we'll kind of go outward to think about the various, you know, individuals, families, communities, will sort of go upwards, but specific caregiver messages that you really want to prioritize or tell, you know, or in terms of vulnerabilities, what would you want to say?
You know, we talk about, and I mentioned this already, that we all have a role to play in preventing child abuse.
Yeah.
And the messaging that we talk about around that, what can you do, is support parents and families. You know, it is really a hard job. And you even said, you know, kids don't come with instruction manuals. I always say, you know, I was a caseworker for quite a few years, and one night I was coming home and I was really tired. I had had a hard day. I had something bad happen at work. And as I was getting out of the car, I heard my next door neighbor. She was kind of yelling, and I heard her brand new baby just screaming. And she had two other kids as well. And I just started to go in my house because I was tired. And I thought, no, I'm going to go over and see if I can help. And I knocked on the door, and she came to the door and just like handed me this crying baby. And she's like, I can't get her to stop crying. And tears are rolling down her face. And I'm like, yeah, I'll take her. And I went in and I held that baby for a while, and we talked and I played with the other kids. And, you know, I almost feel like I did more child abuse prevention in that 2 hours I was at her house in the whole years that I was a caseworker, because sometimes we just all need help. And sometimes, you know, again, parents love their kids. You just get to a point where, you know, you're about to lose it. Because it's so personal to us. Parenting is so personal. So reach out and support parents. If you know a new parent, offer to cook a meal. You know, offer to babysit for a while, get involved. If you don't have friends and families, then get involved in community sports or be there for mentors, join the Big Brother, Big Sister programs. There's so many different ways to get involved to support kids and families. And I think that's one of our primary message is we all have a role to play, get involved. And there's lots of ways you can get involved.
Love that message. All right. Because in some ways it resonates on so many different levels. Supporting families means that, and I say this, people love to want to do things for children, right? Like people are like, I want to mentor and and that's lovely and great. But if you really like kids, you should also think about the adults who are responsible for them. And sometimes we miss that from the conversation. And we, you know, again, will direct all of our resources to the children, but the caregivers who are managing lots of complexities, you know, sometimes a mentor might show up at a door and not even acknowledge the caregivers. And I think, you know, that's a heartbreak. And in a healthy, resilient community that prevents ACEs, it's a community where people look out for each other and care for each other and have neighborhood relationships, because that's the best thing that we can offer. You know, we know that families every family could be fragile, but there are some things that have been proven to help.
100%. You said that so well. 100%. Yeah.
And so that's on the sort of individual family level. I know that there are some things that you want for the provider level. And, you know, so people who are caring for the people who care for children, the people who work with children and families who are vulnerable or who might have needs, what kinds of things are you hoping are in place on that sort of provider level?
Kelsey, you want to talk about this? You want me to keep going?
Sure. Yeah, I think for me, an important message is that our role is important as providers too. Every family is connected with so many providers throughout their lifetime. And those are really opportunities to support the families that we're working with. And being trauma informed is a really great way to start doing that. It helps us take a step back from ourselves and realize that these people that we're working with are people just like us. They have things that they've gone through that impact them on a daily basis. And it's not always about us. So if somebody comes in and they're having a hard day, they might not be the most happy-go-lucky person that you deal with that day, but it's not about you. It's more than likely something that they've gone through that's affecting them today. So I think that's the main message that I would give them.
And remembering, I'll add to that a little bit,
Yeah,
if that's okay.
please. Yes.
Remembering that, your staff, whether you run a McDonald's or whether you run an organization like a home visiting organization where your staff are going out and working with parents directly, they need support. They all need support because, like I said, your staff might have gone through trauma as a child and now they're adults, and it still impacts how they function, and it impacts their health. It also, sometimes we just have bad days and we need that concrete support of a day off. I used to tell my kids that mental health days are just as important as sick days, and having family-friendly policies at your workplace is crucial. We've advocated for and worked for the Family Leave Act, especially a paid family leave act for families. And I think that all business owners or people that run businesses or run programs, run organizations, can work to make that organization family friendly for the people that work there, and try to help them find the supports they need so they can be there for you when you need them to be the worker. Sometimes you have to help them with family issues.
So how perfect. So you talked about some structural issues that you could recommend. I want to talk about some policy things, but I want to just highlight, I don't know if you saw this, but California is considering a 4-day work week, and anything above 32 hours would be overtime. And they're doing that because, again, the data and science says when families can have time to be families and take care of each other, it's cost savings across the system. So they save money in child welfare, juvenile justice, and healthcare costs. And I know it seems like, but wouldn't we be less productive? But actually the data says when families are better supported, they're better, when we're thinking about ACEs prevention, part of that is caring for the people who do the work. And then the other thing, and I'm sure you guys have seen this in the ACEs study and the ACEs data, is that people who go into helping professions tend to have higher levels of ACEs. And so that message that you offered, Denise, to people who were creating programs and services or thinking about their staff, knowing that your staff probably has more vulnerabilities and so might need a lot more, not in a way that's remediation, but just more thoughtful family programming or chances to de-roll or supervision that's more connected or more safe and secure environments. So I know, Kelsey, you talked about how important it is that the organizations that are doing this work be trauma informed, because we know that there needs to be a good container for people who are giving so much of their time, talent, and heart to care for people who are vulnerable. So what would be sort of the macro level if you had your magic wand and you could talk to policymakers and stakeholders and system leaders? What's the wish that, or one or two wishes that you would have for people on that decision-making level beyond, being good to the people who do the work?
Gosh, there's so much. There is so much.
To what aim? Because you do realize that there are people who hear that and say, we give so much money to people and things aren't better. We haven't stopped child abuse and there's like all of these programs and we so help again, help people understand cash for what aim.
There's different levels of prevention. We often talk about them in 3 different levels. We talk about primary. I hate to use the terminology that people don't always understand. that aren't in the field. So a lot of the money goes to intervention. It goes to programs where the abuse has already happened, and they are, now supporting programs that have foster care or therapies for kids that have been abused and need that help, or treatment centers for parents that need drug, alcohol treatment, things like that. Then you have type of prevention that is really towards a certain at-risk population. And, again, lots of times abuse has already happened. That's why they're called at risk. They've already been in the system. And then you have what they call primary prevention, which is programs that are geared towards everyone. And very little money is spent on primary prevention in this country and in our state. A primary prevention program might be like a home visiting program where we reach out to new moms and we offer someone to come to their house, every other week or every other week to help them learn about their new baby, to talk to them about bonding, to, if there is something they need in their lives, to help them figure out what that is so that they have that great start with that baby. That's an example. Those programs are very underfunded. They did get a slight increase in the budget this year in Illinois, I'm happy to say, but not as much as they needed. We're probably going to end up losing some of our programs because there's not enough funding out there for those type of primary prevention programs that really help on that level before the abuse happens. And that would also include like housing programs and employment programs and programs in our high schools for kids that are not going to go to college, but they still need a good career, so those type of programs need good funding.
Love it. Kelsey, do you have anything else to add?
No, I would just absolutely echo what Denise said. It's those programs like housing and, economic reparations, wherever we can make them happen. Those kind of things that really help lessen that divide that's been created throughout the years through systematic things like racism and redlining. And I could go on and on about it. But we need to start making changes to help mitigate the effects of those years and years of
So, we talk here
Right.
a lot about structural violence and structural inequality, and sometimes righting structural wrongs and making sure that things are equitable and safe and fair means that you don't have to do so much targeted intervention. So you're not always having to go firefight, that sometimes you can make sure that the fire doesn't start because you've removed the matches and lighter and extinguishers and the rubbish that create the kindling for fire. So I love that. And I know, Denise, you were talking a lot about programs, but I also want to always remind the audience, we're talking parks and recreation and green space and, art programs and music and all of, I think about what it means to live in a healthy community, right? Healthy communities promote healthy families that, promote good kids. And, and I know people sometimes get really like program focused and not, like community focus. And I know at the heart of so much of your work, as I've followed, is around making sure that communities are good, and that people can sort of be and play and connect, and feel supported and resilient. All right. So, right. Hence the pitch for the Resiliency movie, that's sort of aligned. Is there anything that I have, like a couple more questions, but I don't want to like dominate it with leading questions. Were there things that I didn't ask you that you were hoping that we talk about?
I can't really think of anything.
Okay.
I've enjoyed the conversation. I can tell, Karen, that you have a passion as well. And you really have a great grasp on what we do and what we're trying to do. And what's important to our communities is, you're right. I mean, we need a healthy society. And the way you get that is by creating healthy communities. And you've got it 100%. It's great to talk about this and know there's other organizations and people out there really working in the same direction,
I love it.
have the same values.
chugging along. And can I probably, since, Kelsey, do you have anything? Because I have one final sort of question, right?
Yeah, no, really, I would just like to say that I really love how you mentioned like art programs and nature, like being able to get outside into these parks and things like that, because a lot of the talk around resiliency, I think, focuses on things like breathing exercises and stuff like that. But resiliency is like so much more than that. For me personally, breathing exercises just like make my anxiety go through the roof. So I love to do things like going out to nature and connecting that way, or engaging in art, doing things like that to really help myself build that resilience. So I just really love that you mentioned that.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm with you. It took a long time before I got to be at a place where more mindfulness activities work for me, and I had to sort of figure out what I could integrate that worked. And so really thinking about a full, wonderful life where there's appreciation. So my last sort of wondering is, I don't know if you have like an organization or a individual story. Denise, you shared the beautiful story about like you helping a neighbor, but sometimes I think, the best thing that we can do is tell stories or celebrate. Do you have a final like celebration story that you would like to share to talk about how this work is so transformative? It could be with an organization or an individual, that we could sort of leave with people to know, like, we're not just sort of making up stuff.
Kelsey, do you have anything?
I don't have anything related to this position just yet because I'm so new, but I am a big brother, big sister in my time outside of the job. And I don't know, just like seeing the transformation in my little and just like the last couple of years that we've been together, and how much just having like one extra supportive person can really make a difference in their lives is amazing. So I don't know, it's just really fun. We went to Allerton recently and she overcame her fear of going up in the big tower. So just these like experiences that you get to have with each other. That was her building resilience, her learning that she can do things that make her scared, and she's going to be okay because she has somebody there holding her hand and supporting her, things like that.
I love that. Bruce Perry talks about, he says, we have a lot of language for it, but he's like, kids just need one, the data says one additional adult who loves them unconditionally is the magic formula that sometimes helps trump, right? We think about we need all of that, but it's that having one consistent caring adult that helps heal a lot of our brokenheartedness, even if we experience an ACE. Denise, do you have a story? That was beautiful.
Yeah, it was. I had something that touched me recently. We had an event that was on April 5th. And then it was a woman named Tonier Kane. Yeah. And Tonier tells her story. And she had a really tough childhood. And she talks about layers and layers of trauma. But she said something at the end when she was answering our questions and answers on this webinar about, a GPS system. She's like, have you ever used a GPS system? Mm-hmm. And I'm sure everyone I know, we all went, well, yeah, of course. And she's like, okay, so that GPS system, what happens when, it tells you to turn in 500 feet? What do you do? And she said, what I do, and I know what I do is I go, okay, well, here we go. I turn left. It told me to turn left because I don't really know what 500 feet is. And I just had this happen the other day. I made the wrong turn. My GPS told me to turn in 500 feet, and I thought it meant right here. And I turned, and no. So what does the GPS do? This little system, if you, whether it's on your phone, built into your car, it's not a super expensive component. You can buy a handheld GPS for like $30 nowadays or less. And if you make a mistake, it says recalculating. It's built into the system for you to make a mistake, and it helps you to correct it. It offers you options for correcting a mistake. And it just really touched me when she talked about, we spend thousands of dollars on programs and different things that are not programmed in to let you make mistakes. We all make mistakes, whether it's in parenting, whether it's in life, whether it's in our jobs. And we need to be a society that has it programmed in for people to make mistakes, and we help them get back on track, just like a GPS does.
I love that. What a perfect conclusion. I love Healing Mean. We just watched it. Those of us who are a part of our learning collaborative just watched it because we think it's a great example of like the safety domain when we're thinking about why we need trauma-informed organization. So if you guys go Google that, the video is readily available, but it really talks about how we as system stakeholders create harm, sometimes unintentionally, when we have punitive, non-restorative practices, and how we disrupt family healing. Because her story is this wonderful redemptive story about our human potential and possibilities. And when we don't give up on families and believe that they can always course correct, most do, but we have to give them space to do that.
Right.
It has been, so wonderful having this conversation. Looking forward to additional collaboration. Wonderful resource in our state. And so please continue to check them out. Wonderful partnerships. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Karen. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, stay well. Bye-bye.
Bye.